Welcome back to Beyond the Headline, everyone. It's an exciting day to be on the show with us because we're in our second episode of our Rough Draft Venture series, and I'm here with the co-founder and CEO of Quickhelp, Hikari Senju. Hikari, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenna. I'm very excited to be here.
Can we just start out with an introduction to Quickhelp and the need you're fulfilling for students and tutors?
Right, yeah. So Quickhelp basically is an app for college students to get on-demand tutoring. So when I was a college student, I'd be stuck in a homework, it'd be late at night, and there'd be no way to really get help. And some, office hours might be crowded that day, and so I really couldn't get my answer. My friends can't really help, but the TFs are maybe not being very responsive. And so this is like an occurrence that a lot of college students face, right? Is they kind of freak out in the last minute and they don't know what to do. And it's like a real pain point that college students have. And so that was kind of the problem we're trying to solve. Like the greater mission, as we've evolved, focus on this problem a bit more is really to make educational resources accessible for everyone, right? So the average tutor in Boston, for example, charges about $80 an hour, and it takes forever to contact them. Our mission is to make it so it shouldn't just be wealthy people who have access to tutoring, people who have those resources or go to those kind of schools that have really great resources. Tutoring should be a right for everyone, right? And so make it cheap, make it fast, make it easy, and because tutoring has been shown to drastically increase a student's performance. So that's kind of like our overarching mission. Our goal is to really spread that out. But the initial problem really was this kind of college experience that everybody faces, this late minute, last minute help. I'm freaking out and I need someone to help me. So that's kind of where we started.
I'd love to rewind there just a little bit back to your time in San Francisco where you realized how you could merge the on-demand economy and education. What was it like when you got back to school?
Yeah. So I had just, finished an internship in San Francisco where these on-demand apps were really the rage. Everywhere. You had Spring, you had Elementary, everyone's anything that could possibly be on-demand was on-demandized, like groceries, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the environment I came back from, right? I was like, wow, I think this is really interesting. It's creating, making these networks and these communities stronger. And so my co-founder at the time, who was just a friend at that time, we're throwing around ideas. He's a tutor. He's basically he's a tutor. He's a proctor at one of the undergrad houses at Harvard, which I was also living in. And he's also a PhD student. And we're we're both very interested in education and interested in doing some startup or building some kind of project that tied in education, and I brought up this Uber for X thing that was going on in San Francisco, and I was like, maybe we can apply this somehow to in the education space. And what's really interesting is that we realized that if an education on-demand education app were to work, it would be Cambridge, right? Because there's really nowhere else as high a concentration of really educated people than any other city, really, because it's a college town, and so if it doesn't work here, it's probably not going to work anywhere else. And so this is probably the best place to start a network for educators, and in our instance, like an Uber for tutors. And so the basic idea was that connecting undergrads looking for help with grad students who know a lot but aren't being paid a lot. Grad students are really smart, but they're maybe living off a $20,000 stipend per year. They're barely making ends meet. They want to have flexible ways of making money on the side while they do their own research or they're pursuing their own field. And so that was kind of the idea, right? It's connecting undergrads with grad students. I was very lucky because my co-founder was a grad student, so he kind of understood the pain point of grad students very well. And I'm an undergrad, obviously, so it was kind of he was a grad student, I was an undergrad. It's like, hey, well, your people could help my people, et cetera. And so that's kind of where we launched the first version of the app. It was like an Uber for tutors, particularly connecting undergrads with grad students.
And when you launched, you guys had your first customer on the first day, and then 1,000 the first month. How did you navigate that early growth? Right,
yeah. So I like to mention that this is actually my second big startup I had worked at. I had worked in another company with my roommate at that time, and I never saw that kind of usage, especially upon launching. And so I definitely knew, maybe it's because I went kind of struggled through that earlier period, that I realized very quickly that we were onto something. There's something very special happening. You don't just like see people using an app immediately, especially like a very janky app that I built over like 2 weekends while like balancing my P sets or whatever. People were immediately finding value from that product, and so that was very exciting. And we knew we were onto something. So it was really just it was really just crazy, just constantly working. This was finals period as well for me, so
good timing.
Yeah. It's like the story of my college life really was like somehow managing my the projects I was working on plus these various school obligations, and so yeah, it was just I don't know. I mean, because our first 1,000 users were largely like at Harvard and BU. And because we're like a location-based, like location-specific individual meetup app, the way the app was set up was pretty good and ready to take these 1,000 users relatively quickly. But it was just like fixing bugs and just making sure certain some flows were kind of awkward, and so fixing those flows is kind of like how the first like month was spent really.
How do you approach growth today differently than you did that first month?
Yeah. So, I think this applies, also a couple of months after when we launched, we were kind of like growing very, it's like kind of like very haphazard, very aggressively, launching in new places, not necessarily thinking about, like a strategy to like make sure that we did very well in each of these new places, just kind of staking growth for the sake of growth. And sometimes that would work, sometimes that wouldn't work. Some locations are more receptive to this app than others. And so I think we've kind of like, since that moment of just kind of like, hey, let's just, do everything and just see what sticks. We're kind of more like, deliberate and in some ways more careful in some ways of like making sure that, the places we launch, we know, ahead of time what kind of students they are and do our research and make sure we get enough tutors first in some area before we launch there, and just being more deliberate, more careful and making sure that when we launch somewhere that we're actually doing a good job at that location and we don't just move on and think, okay, cool, we launched, so let's move on to the next city, because there are people who are really depending on our service, and so if we launch haphazardly at one location and someone asks for help there and then they don't get helped, then that should be the priority, right? The priority should be helping the people where we already are at, not trying to, then again, haphazardly launch in another location. And so really, when we launch, making sure that we actually really are providing value and being very diligent about that is kind of like, I think, a change in mentality since like that first, couple of months, really. I
know part of your philosophy, though, and it's something you've shared before, is that you love being scrappy.
Yeah.
It's a part of your culture. Why is it important to you?
I think scrappiness forces focus. So if you have a lot of resources, right? If you're raise a lot of money or you have a huge team or whatever, it's really easy to get like not focused, not kind of like lose priority of what's very important. What are the goals that you need to achieve? One at a time, right? And you kind of try to do everything at once, and you lose focus. And I think scrappiness kind of forces focus onto you. So when you have limited resources, you can only do one thing at a time. You can't do 50 things at a time. When you're scrappy and when your team is small, communication is fast. So you can iterate your product faster. You don't have as much overhead. You don't have as much burn. You can try out more things. I think all these things are very critical, especially when a company is starting out. I think that really adds diligence and creates a strong culture around focus and diligence and scrappiness that has long-term implications on the company.
How big is your team now?
Yeah, so it's very small. I mean, I'm still doing all the engineering. I'm also the CEO. I'm doing all the engineering. We have another full-time member who's my co-founder. And then we have a bunch of like part-time people helping us with marketing or branding or press, and maybe some engineering on the side, but really just 2 full-time people, and really doing the best we can. But because it's so small, the team is so small, it's really always just working, always hustling. Yeah.
What's your approach with that in mind of bringing on new team members and imparting to them like, hey, this is how we work. You're a department of one.
Yeah. So I think, it goes back to this importance of being scrappy because it forces focus and it forces diligence and it forces making sure that you're actually doing something well and doing something that people want. And so, what we'd usually do when we try to bring somebody on is we would, they would join our team for maybe a week or two. We'll see how that works. If it doesn't work, it's not working. What's one of the benefits of having a small team is that you really can test each individual out because you don't really know when you're just interviewing somebody or talking to somebody how they will turn out, right? You just don't know. They're two totally different people sometimes. The person who shows up at the interview and this person who shows up to work. So I think having a small team gives us that advantage and that benefit of really testing and making sure that every single person that we really do bring on is a good team member to add to the team.
What have you learned about hiring?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the most important thing again is that you just never know how someone's going to turn out. Somebody again can be really smart, be really credentialed, be really on paper just seem like the best person on the planet, but their heart's not in it, or they're distracted, or they're thinking of other things, or those things matter, right? And so I'd rather have someone who's slightly less credentialed but really passionate about a project than someone who's over credentialed but isn't as passionate. I think passion is very important, especially for a startup, and I think that's obviously skills are important. You have to have skills. You can't just be passionate. But I think that's really something interesting. It's not necessarily the person who it seems the most impressive at first who ends up providing the most value. And I think this is true for even other things, right? Other things in life, whether it's a sports team or whatever. Sometimes the best person you draft into your sports team who has all these credentials ends up flopping, and sometimes the person who's like the 6th round pick ends up being the all-star. So I think that's something we learned like personally and for real from this experience.
It's really important that you mentioned that because the only way to operate really a small company is to have people who are passionate because you're working, as you've shared before, all the time because there's just no other option. One of the things you mentioned was your growth approach today is more deliberate. Can you give us an example of how a project is run where it's scrappy and everyone's working, but it's also deliberate and organized?
Right. So we have like a huge to-do list of like things that we want to do and, ideas and feedback we're getting constantly from our users. And we just, and one of the benefits of having a small team is you can just talk directly, about it for each thing with the person who's sitting next to you. You don't need to have like company-wide meetings or waste time that way. Really just constantly talking to each other, constantly figuring out what our priorities are, making sure we're on the right track, and then just doing it quickly and seeing, pushing things out there. And so, I wouldn't say there's like necessarily like a formalized structure of like, we have like, especially when the team is so small, we don't have like weekly meetings. We have like hourly meetings because we're sitting next to each other. Or whatever, multi-daily meetings, just kind of on a ad hoc basis. But I think that's the most natural way, especially when the team is so small and everyone's sitting at the same table and looking at each other. Those are kind of how decisions are made. And really just making sure that people really do stand up for their ideas though, and they aren't pushovers, and they if they believe in something, have them really stand up for them and really bat for it, because sometimes those ideas are the ideas that really change things. So having a culture where people are proactive about their ideas and always pushing out ideas, and then just really talking about them thoroughly and then testing them, and then getting data on these tests, and just constantly always doing that and making your product better, I think is what we do and what we continue to do.
What's been an example of a feature or a project that someone's had super high conviction on that you did pursue as a result of all being there and believing it, and it turned out to be really important?
Yeah. So I think one idea that wasn't my idea was the idea of having this course tagging system, right? So the original version of the app was kind of like, I need help with specific math and like a question in math, and get sent out to all the math tutors. One of the co-founders, really wanted it to be more course specific. So it's more college based. You select a specific course you need help with, and then you send out a question regarding that course. And then he really owned that project, because one of the issues with being a course-based model is you got to create like a tagging system. so that a course at BU it matches with an equivalent course at Harvard. So if a student seeks for help in an intro to econ class at BU, it also gets sent to tutors in Harvard. And so that he kind of saw through from the initiation of the idea to all the tagging to making sure that it was executed properly, and that ended up being a good idea. And one of the cool things when a student opens their app is like, oh my god, all my courses are on here, and that's really cool. And that's like one of those kind of magical moments. It's like, oh, I can get help for any of my courses, and it seems very tangible and real. So I think that's an example of a person really owning a feature and starting seeing it from start to finish, and that benefiting the entire team.
It goes hand in hand too with your efforts scaling, because as you grow your audience, you said before you're at 16,000 right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to add more features for them. It's not going to be the same app that you started
absolutely
with.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
As you focus on being deliberate in those expansions, you're focusing right now on 3 main cities. Why is that important?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the earlier point that when you launch in a city, you want to make sure that you're actually servicing the people in that city, and that you aren't doing a haphazard job when you launch somewhere. And so that's why it's so absolutely critical that we don't spread ourselves too thin. And so you asked the question earlier about like mistakes we made earlier and things we kind of learned from that process, especially in expansion. And for example, the first semester of when we, like last year, basically, we expanded to too many places. We were launching places like Northwestern and just really just like random places, just because we were like, okay, just because we could, and that was clearly a mistake, right? Like we should be focusing on like big cities that have huge density of students and have huge graduate student populations, and really go deep in each of these cities and make these kind of like our strongholds. Because these cities have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students, or they actually do definitely have hundreds of thousands of students. So that's why we focus on these cities, because especially as like a location-based like meetup app, right? The value proposition isn't that you can Skype with a tutor. There's a lot of app websites like that out there. Our value proposition is you can actually meet with a tutor. You're meeting, because people learn better when they're meeting face to face than through Skype. And so, especially because of that, making sure we dominate a location is so much more important than just like kind of spreading everywhere. And I think that might have to do with the fact that we're like a location-based app. Really, I think that makes dominating a location that much more critical.
I'd love to shift gears, Hikari, and talk for a couple of minutes about your experiences as a founder. You started from when you first got to school. How does it feel now being a founder? What's different?
Yeah, I think you're more like realistic, right? Like it's really interesting. It's like I think I'm like my like batch of founders. It's kind of like the Social Network generation of founders, in which like we all saw like the Social Network movie or whatever, or these like various movies that kind of glorified startup founders, which is important, which is good. It's good for the ecosystem, etc. But it's hard work, and you can't have unrealistic expectations. And I think probably when I was starting off, I was a lot more naive, really. But I think one can say that about pretty much anything that one pursues. We're definitely more like naive. We thought whatever, it's gonna like blow up. Things rarely work like that, right? Things seem like they blow up overnight just because you have like long period of like just accumulated growth. And so there's that one moment where it seems like, oh my god, they blew up overnight, but you kind of can't ignore this like long period of like just growing very, very consistently and slowly, but like kind of grinding in there. And so just being more realistic about what it means to be a founder, what it means to provide services for people, what it means to create the value and create things that people value. And I think that's probably the most important thing. Really, it's about creating things that people want, and people care about, not necessarily just like throwing things into the air and be like, oh my God, I'm a genius. It's working out so well.
Do you think you needed the naivete to start, though?
Yeah. I think yeah, I think if you aren't naive about something and you really are aware of the challenges and what you're going into, many people probably wouldn't do this. Um, I'm very lucky that I was able to start this process while in college, so I kind of knew what I was getting into upon me when I graduated. And I said I'm going to focus full time on a startup. But I have peers who kind of like jump straight into startup, but they never really went through that period, and so they're kind of now doing some soul searching there because it is hard work, right? It's not just like you launch a product and it's going to blow up. So, but I do believe, yeah, sometimes uh, yeah, being a founder requires you to be very courageous, right? And I think all courage is in some form probably like a version of stupidity. So, yeah, I think it is important to be courageous and bold.
You mentioned peers and other founders, and I know that networking is really important to you. What role has that
Well,
played
I
in
wouldn't
your
say it's like that important to me, but okay.
what role has it played in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
experience?
yeah, sure. So my view of networking really is, and I push back on this like the what I think networking is important because I do believe that ultimately networking is a transactional experience, right? Meeting somebody, you providing value for them, they're providing value for you. But if you don't have any value to provide, it's kind of a very it's kind of a waste of time, really. If you're going someplace and you're just trying to expect value, but without providing value, it's not that's not networking. That's a parasitic relationship,
Hmm.
right? And you can only get so far being parasitic. So my view is always that you want to be somebody who has value, who creates value, who is valuable, and then once you believe you're that, or you believe you're on the path of that, or you continue to do that, then networking can have really, really great impact on your career and on your startup, etc. So the first thing we did, obviously, when we were starting this was create a product people actually wanted, people cared, not necessarily focus. Step one wasn't networking. Right? Step one was creating a product. And maybe it's because I'm very lucky because I'm an engineer and I can do these things on my own and I don't need to find a technical co-founder or find investors to get engineers first. I could do all this stuff on my own
Very
initially.
lucky.
Yeah, very lucky there, exactly. And so not everyone has the benefit to do that, right? Some people, a lot of really successful founders have to go through this first step of networking, finding money, and then starting their own project and testing out their ideas. But at the same time, I do believe that it's about the transactions of values, and so you want to be somebody who at least people believe has a lot of value to provide. And I think that comes from just being very passionate about certain things, knowing a lot about certain things. That making sure that passion is very clear and that they really buy your earnestness and you're passionate about a specific thing. It's really interesting. We got funding from we're having this discussion about our rough draft ventures. Peter I've known since freshman year of college, right? And I just got to know him because not because I thought he was gonna fund me with Rough Draft. I don't think Rough Draft even existed when I first became friends with him. It's because we're both passionate about startups, and we'd go to events together, and I help organize some of his events, and we'd always be talking. We'd be spending late nights working, talking about startups, etc. And so I feel like if you're really passionate about something and you work hard about it and pursue your passions, you inevitably meet like-minded people, and you're gonna connect with them. And I think it's better to think of it that way, right, than like some like artificial networking thing, than just meeting people who are like-minded with you, and creating bonds with them and working together and helping each other out. Peter reached out to me actually after we launched this product and said, "Hey, we would like to invest in you. Do you want to come pitch to the partners?" And so I think it's very important to just like pursue your passions, meet people who have similar passions, and those kind of connections will happen rather naturally. Though, and again, at the same time, I'm kind of being, the other it's kind of unfair probably for me to be saying this because I am like an engineer. I can do all my coding. I do go to Harvard, so there's like these connections that do come, slightly easier than maybe if I didn't have these things. But I think it is very important to be passionate and pursue your passions, and I think some of these things will happen naturally.
What events and communities were helpful for you when you were in school, or that you would recommend to others?
Right. I think my engineering courses. So I think one of the things that one should try to do, especially if you want to do startups upon graduating, is trying to find good co-founders, right? And finding people who you might want to start companies with eventually, or join your company, or who you might want to join them eventually. And that's and so as an engineer, I met the smartest friends from going to just taking hard CS classes. And by taking hard CS classes, I spent late nights with them, bonded with them, learned a lot from them, and like just it goes back to the previous point of just doing things you're passionate about, right? So, if you're passionate about design, go to these design workshops and go to these design meetings and do your own designs and work on your own projects and share them. And it all kind of comes naturally in some ways. So, I was really interested in startups. I'd go to these startup events. I'd met Peter that way. I was, really interested in engineering, and I was a CS major, so I met a lot of my engineering friends that way who even now give good advice regarding the product or various engineering-related things. And yeah, just doing things, just doing things where you can meet really interesting, smart people in like a work setting, right? And with, people with value and people with skills. And I think that's, as long as you're doing that, as long as you're meeting interesting people who have, I guess, like, value to provide to you, and you're doing things, and you're going to events that makes you increase the number of people like that you're meeting, I think you're spending a good amount of time. I think that's like an effective use of college. Because it is, right, yeah, because you will never again be surrounded by so many smart people once you graduate. It's a very lonely life after graduation. So, just make the most of, like, meeting smart people, I think.
Very true. So last one for you, Hikari, and kind of piggybacks off of that one. What areas are you excited now to grow and learn as a founder?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had this conversation with some friends, with my mother actually, where I was saying working on this project that I'm doing all the engineering, I'm not necessarily becoming like amazing engineer this way, right? The best way I could become an amazing engineer is if I went and worked at some big firm where I had some great mentor who could teach me all the tricks of becoming a great engineer. I'm like a mediocre hacky engineer. And I've become probably more mediocre engineer because of this process. But one thing I have learned, though, is learning how to manage and work in a team, and be clear, and be decisive, and be a leader. And I've learned a lot about being a leader through this process. And I think that hopefully that will only continue to happen. You can take all these classes in leadership, and but at the end of the day, being a leader or being a founder, it's like playing basketball. You can't read about basketball. You gotta play it. You gotta play it many times. You gotta lose, and you gotta spend a lot of time playing the game. And so I think, that's kind of like my personal growth is wanting to become a better founder, a better leader, more skilled in that way, in which I'm like smarter and I can provide more insight, I can provide more value, but at the same time being like a better person that people can trust and people believe in and people can follow, and being a bold person and being assertive. And these things don't necessarily come very naturally, and it's something that definitely didn't come naturally to me. And I think, but you just got to do it, and you kind of learn by doing. And I think that's the benefit of starting a company.
I think you learn by doing is probably the best way to close any conversation, because it's something that no matter what you're doing, you always have to remember. Right. What's the best way, Hikari, for everyone to stay up to date with the work you guys are doing at Quickhelp?
Right. Well, you can follow us on Twitter, the Quickhelper, I believe. You can check out our website. You can download the app. It's called Quickhelp. And so probably just following our Twitter, liking our Facebook page. There's a lot of cool things you can do to stay in touch with what we're doing. Very exciting times, and hopefully more exciting times to come.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, no, thank you.